Hello everybody, thanks so much for tuning in. Okay, I'm just waiting to make sure I'm actually live and that a few people are on. Amazing. Okay, so the very first thing I'm thinking right now as I'm giving this little talk on imposter syndrome is, who am I to be giving this talk on imposter syndrome? Obviously it's a scary thing to do, and I'm going to use this actually to help kind of explain what you can do to combat imposter syndrome. Now, one of the things I really want to start with is turning imposter syndrome a little bit on its head. What do I mean by that? We often think of imposter syndrome as something negative, and I think the main reason we think of it as something negative is because it has the word syndrome. No, not often are syndrome something we want, right? And I think honestly it's a little bit of an over pathologizing of something that maybe doesn't need to be, it's not a disease, imposter syndrome. And actually, I want to ensure that you have imposter syndrome forever. I know that sounds crazy, but hear me out, okay? Obviously, imposter syndrome, like we said, it gets a bad rep because it's a syndrome, but it's actually not something to be scared of. And here's why, okay? Imposter syndrome is actually a sign of growth, right? When you're basically living your life, let's say in your comfort zone, and then I guess you have a stretching zone, and then you grow, right? How do you know that you're on the cusps of your comfort zone? How do you know you're leaving your comfort zone and about to actually be in the growth zone? That's the feeling of imposter syndrome. That's the feeling of being an imposter. What does it feel like? It feels like, who am I? Like, who am I to be doing this, right? Like, who am I to be giving an Instagram live on OKclarity? Or I'm a teacher, I don't know what I'm saying. Or I'm a business person, I'm telling this client I can offer them this, but like, I don't really know what I can, right? It's this feeling of, I'm an imposter. Like, someone's going to find me out and discover that I'm nobody. I don't know anything, right? And as scary as that is, that feeling, it's this physical indication that we're actually leaving our comfort zones, that we're actually leaving this feeling, right, of becoming an imposter, okay? And it means we're doing something that's stretching our limitations. It's literally called growth, okay? And we're naturally made to resist this growth, right? We don't want this. Like, we don't want to feeling uncomfortable. We want the feeling of comfort zone, but the truth is, on the other side of our comfort zone, that's where life happens, right? It's interesting because Adam Grant, who's a social psychologist, has a lot of really interesting quotes about imposter syndrome. And one thing he says is that doubting yourself doesn't mean you're going to fail. It usually means you're facing a new challenge and you're going to learn, right? Feeling uncertainty is a precursor to growth, okay? So yes, it's scary, you feel unqualified, but it's not about being unqualified. It's about you have this hidden potential, right? And you're underestimating yourself, and that potential, that imposter, let's call it imposter phenomenon, so it doesn't sound like a disease, right? That imposter phenomenon lets you know, like, you're almost there, you're getting there, right? And on the other side of these feelings of imposter-ness, or whatever you want to call it, on this imposter phenomenon, you are going to get what you want, but a lot of times we don't go onto the other side because we have these scared feelings, right? I'll give you an example. One fear a lot of us have could be, when we deal with imposter phenomenon is, I'm too young. I'll tell you a funny story about being too young. So my grandfather, when he was 23, he was interviewing to be a shul rabbi, and the interviewer said to him, hey, we're a little worried that you're a bit young for the job. And what did he say? He said, well, if you're worried about that, if you're worried about me being young, don't worry. I'll get older every day. And he was very tongue-in-cheek like that. And they gave him the job. And needless to say, he was actually there for 50 years. So, and he made quite an impact on his community. And I can only imagine if he would have let those feelings get to him, like, oh, you're right, maybe I am too young. That could have been a really, really scary thought, and really could have caused him to just like have a whole different life. And, I think letting imposter phenomenon get to you can really have it can really have some negative effects, right? So on the other side of these uncomfortable feelings is on the other side of imposter syndrome. That's where it all happens. So where does it come from and how do we deal with it, right? So a lot of times it comes from the fear of failure, right? We're scared to fail, which we obviously understand what that means. But I think another thing that people don't think about as much is this fear of success, right? It's like, wait, what if I actually do this? Right? Like, what if I actually get this client? What if I actually get this job? What if I actually do this? Like, then what? Right? And it's this fear of, what do I do next? Now I'm even more of an imposter, right? And the goal is we want to have imposter syndrome or phenomenon forever and ever, because that means that we're growing constantly. But it's also not comfortable. I think another reason we tend to feel imposter syndrome is because of this concept of perfectionism, right? Perfect is the enemy of good enough. And when we try so hard to be perfect, we can't ever get there 100%. We're striving to be perfect. We're never going to get there. So how do we deal with imposter phenomenon? Like, we get it's an issue. It's a problem. Even if we want to reframe it and live our lives differently, it's still something we need to manage. And so I want to share tonight a couple of techniques, 3 techniques actually, and these techniques are based in Viktor Frankl. So for any of you who are not familiar with Viktor Frankl, he is a psychologist. He wrote a very famous book, his seminal work, which was called Man's Search for Meaning. And half the book is his experiences in concentration camps. And the second half of the book is actually his therapy that he developed called logotherapy. Most people don't read that part unless they're nerdy. So I guess I'm adding myself here as a nerd a little bit because that was my favorite part of the book. And he basically, his idea is that the main drive of a human being is the will to meaning. And until this point, other psychologists have felt very differently, right? Sigmund Freud, we all know him. He felt that the point of life was about pleasure. And then comes along Alfred Adler, point of life, power. So now Frankl, point of life, meaning. And he actually came up with a lot of different ways that meaning can help, in life in different ways. And so I'm actually going to share 3 techniques you may or may not have heard of, and I'm going to show you how they can be applied to imposter syndrome. So the first one is called de-reflection, okay? And de-reflection is this idea where we shift a person's focus away from ourselves and our own lives and we direct attention towards others. So what that means is, right, we're stopping the talking about ourselves and thinking just about ourselves. And I know this is a hard truth, but like, people don't really think about others that much. Like, people don't really care about us as much as we think. When we are dealing with imposter syndrome, the way to use the reflection is, wait a minute, how can I be in service of others? Like, let me get out of my own head, like forget what I'm dealing with, forget what I'm thinking, forget, I can't do this, I'm not good. How can I be in service of the other person, right? Let's say, someone wrote in, they're a teacher and they feel sometimes incompetent, like they're teaching a subject, they feel like they have no knowledge, right? So in that case, right, instead of thinking, oh my gosh, I don't know what I'm doing, who am I, how am I having this job, how are they trusting me? Instead, de-reflection, stop thinking about yourself and think, okay, how can I serve the people that are in this audience, right? My students, let's say. How can I be of service? Taking your mind off of yourself and onto others. And by the way, it's weird, but that's the way to self-actualize. It seems counterintuitive, but according to Viktor Frankl, at least, there is no way to self-actualize by focusing on yourself. You cannot get to the next level. Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, this whole idea of like getting to the point where you're self-actualizing and living your best life. It's very hard to get there by focusing on yourself. And it's ironic, but de-reflection, focusing on others, really helps to get there. Okay, so that's number 1, de-reflection. And it's a very common technique in logotherapy. It works very well for imposter syndrome. Number 2, Socratic questioning. Okay, Socratic questioning is basically the idea of questioning everything. Questioning, okay? So with imposter syndrome, one of the things you can do is assess the evidence. So what you can do is you can make a list of evidence that you're inadequate for something, and then evidence that you're competent. And then you start questioning that list, right? Let's say you go through the inadequacies. Okay, so, I'll give you my example, right? maybe I have imposter syndrome giving this live on OKclarity because, I don't know, I feel inadequate. And then I ask myself, well, why do I feel inadequate? Maybe it's because I don't have a big Instagram following. Oh, okay. Well, why do you feel uncomfortable that you don't have a big Instagram following? Why does that make you inadequate? And you have to go deeper. Maybe I feel inadequate because I don't think people will listen to anyone unless they have a big account. Does that mean you have nothing to say that's important, that not even one person can gain if you don't have a big account? You see what I'm saying? You have to keep digging and keep digging and keep digging. And the truth is, I'll be honest, sometimes it's a lot easier when someone does it to you than when you have to question yourself. But, questioning yourself is obviously a great technique as well. And obviously, give yourself evidence that you're competent too, not just why you're incompetent. And so, again, this is one of those techniques that when you're doing it on yourself, you have to really, it's hard because you really have to stay focused and really, be committed to getting to the bottom of why you feel inadequate. But if you have a friend or obviously a therapist or a coach, this is something that can really help you through. And the third idea that I wanted to talk about is something called paradoxical intention. Okay, paradoxical intention is a very cool technique, but it must be used with care. So it's better if someone's skilled in using it, but it still works. And it's this kind of idea where you have to use elements of humor, okay? Humor to help combat imposter syndrome, or really anything, but we're going to use it with imposter syndrome. So let me give you an example. So my grandfather, when he was a shul rabbi, so he actually practiced logotherapy as a rabbi. He had a PhD and he did his whole thesis on logotherapy, which is how I got into this in the first place. He had this idea. So he would teach bar mitzvah boys, and the bar mitzvah boys would get up to the bima ready to read their Torah portion, and they would start shaking with nerves. And most people would say, hey, don't be so nervous. It's going to be fine. Not my grandfather. What'd he do? He would say, you know what? You should be really nervous. Why don't you shake so much during this Torah reading? You're going to be the shakiest person that was ever in a crowd, right? You're going to be so shaky. You're going to win the world record book, world Guinness record, right? That's what it is. For the shakiest person to ever give read his Torah portion at his bar mitzvah. And what would that automatically do? That would kind of inculcate a lot of humor into the situation and kind of and have almost a paradoxical intention, right? I've used this on my son once. He was crying. He was like, Mommy, I can't stop crying. He was 4. And I said, I first was trying to get him to stop crying, but I couldn't. I don't even know why he was crying. I don't think he knew why he was crying. But anyway, I said, you know what? Don't stop crying. Cry the hardest you've ever cried in your whole life. Cry harder than anyone has ever cried. And I was making it so dramatic that it was just funny and we laughed, right? And so I guess, how do you apply this to imposter syndrome, right? Humor is really helpful. When you think, right, so maybe what's my idea here? Okay, let's say I go back to, I have imposter syndrome about giving a live on imposter syndrome. Ironic. But anyway, instead of saying oh my gosh, I'm so nervous, right? No, I'm going to give the worst Instagram live there ever was. And I'm going to win the award for the lowest amount of views there ever was on an Instagram live. And it's going to be fine, right? And sometimes with that attitude, it works paradoxically. I hope it works paradoxically here. I hope I don't have the lowest amount of views in live, whatever. But, that's not what I focus on. De-reflection, not myself. That's not what I'm focusing on. Who can I serve? That's what I need to be focused on, right? And also the second technique, start questioning myself, right? I started to question myself and then I went back to de-reflection. And so those are 3 techniques I wanted to share tonight. Again, logotherapy is something that I find very, very fascinating. I love to use it in coaching, and people always ask me, what does that mean that you use logotherapeutic techniques? And it's very hard to explain. And so I'm happy that I was able to give this little live tonight so you can sort of see in action, right? Imposter syndrome is a phenomenon hopefully we all go through, and it's really a sign that we're growing. It's a sign that we're on the other side of imposter syndrome is greatness, is the life you want to live. And you just got to get there. You got to get past the feelings of inadequacy, whether that's, de-reflecting, whether you're questioning your inadequacies, whether you're doing paradoxical intention, and obviously there's a million other things to do. These are just a few things I wanted to share tonight. And these can be done on your own. These can be done with the help of a friend or a coach or a therapist or whatever it is. But again, let's try to reframe it together. I still keep calling it imposter syndrome because it's so ingrained, but let's not over-pathologize it. It's a phenomenon that occurs when we are growing, and it's normal and it's good. And we want to have imposter syndrome forever so that we're always growing. And these are some techniques we can use to get through it so that we could get to the other side where the awesomeness is. So I really appreciate you listening with me tonight, and bearing with me as I cope with my own imposter syndrome about this live about imposter syndrome, right? And I hope they help somewhat. I'd love to see you on my page also at Rikki Ash Consulting, and consulting seems like it's spelled wrong, but it's actually with the word soul in the middle, consulting. And feel free, I'll give it a minute if anyone has any questions, or you can just ask questions, on my page afterwards. All right, not so many people are actually live, so I'm going to leave the questions for afterwards when people view it. Thank you, OKclarity, for hosting, and yeah, have a great night, everybody.